1947 Rockefeller patent shows origins of Zika virus, and what about those genetically modified mosquitoes? As you probably already heard, the World Health Organization (WHO) recently made an announcement declaring the Zika virus to be a global health emergency. They did so without providing much detail about the disease, however, so here is some more information and answers to questions many people are asking, such as, where did it come from? And do the millions of genetically modified mosquitoes that have been released in these areas have anything to do with it? First of all, this sexually transmitted virus has been around for approximately 70 years, and is actually marketed by 2 companies, but before we get to that, let's find out who owns the patent on the virus. It's the Rockefeller Foundation. Zika is a flavivirus, which is pronounced a bit like flavor. Flavivirus. Most viruses in this family are carried by arthropods, mosquitoes and ticks. We've known about Zika virus since at least 1947, when researchers from the Rockefeller Foundation put a rhesus monkey in a cage in the middle of Zika forest of Uganda. The team was conducting surveillance for yellow fever. But rhesus 766 would ultimately become the first known carrier of Zika virus. It remains unconfirmed if monkeys or other animals are consistent carriers or reservoirs for the disease. The virus is also marketed by 2 companies, LGC Standards headquartered in the UK and ATCC headquartered in the US. Where do genetically modified mosquitoes fit into the picture? A recent article published by the Antimedia first brought to the world's attention the fact that millions of genetically modified mosquitoes had been released in Brazil. This is where Oxitec first unveiled its large-scale, genetically modified mosquito farm in July 2012 with the goal of reducing the incidence of dengue fever. Oxitec has already released a large number of GM alophiles that were used to kill off wild pests that damage crops. In the Cayman Islands, 3 million GM mosquitoes were released, and in this case over 90% of the original natural native mosquito population was suppressed. The same results were also seen in Brazil. On the other side of the coin, genetically modified mosquitoes are now being proposed as a solution to stop the spread of such viruses. LiveScience recently published an article alluding to that, as did the Globe and Mail, while other media sources, such as RT News, are reporting that these GM mosquitoes could be linked to the virus. It is difficult to separate fact from fiction here. The point is, however, that when it comes to GM insects, there are many things to be concerned about, one being, what happens if someone receives a bite from one of these mosquitoes? Will their GM DNA be injected into your arm or leg? Oxitec has counteracted this objection by stating they only plan to release male mosquitoes, which don't bite. This again sounds good in theory, but in reality, sorting millions of insects according to sex is no small feat. And even FKMCD notes that although every effort is made to release only males, Oxitec trials show that 0.03% of the mosquitoes released are female. Dr. Joseph Mercola. If you think about it, with millions of mosquitoes released, we are still talking about thousands of mosquitoes that can bite. Estimates of genetically modified insects that have been released into the environment are between 50-100 million. What about the environmental health impacts report? And what about the synthetic DNA from the bites? Who is tracking all of this stuff, and how exactly do you track it? Why are we just assuming everything is okay, without any evidence to back it up? The potential exists for these genes, which hop from one place to another, to infect human blood by finding entry through skin lesions or inhaled dust. Such transmission could potentially wreak havoc with the human genome by creating insertion mutations and other unpredictable types of DNA damage. According to Alfred Hendler, a geneticist at the Agriculture Department in Hawaii, mosquitoes can develop resistance to the lethal gene and might then be released inadvertently. Source: Todd Shelley, an entomologist for the Agriculture Department in Hawaii, said 3.5% of the insects in the laboratory tests survived to adulthood, despite presumably carrying the lethal gene. Another factor to consider is this: tetracycline and other antibiotics are now showing up in the environment, in soil and surface water samples. These GM mosquitoes were designed to die in the absence of tetracycline, which is introduced in the lab in order to keep them alive long enough to breed. They were designed this way assuming they would not have access to that drug in the wild. With tetracycline exposure, for example, in a leg, these mutant insects could actually thrive in the wild, potentially creating a nightmarish scenario. Dr. Helen Wallace, director of GM Watch UK, warned about the GM fruit flies that were released a couple of years ago. Releasing Oxitec's GM fruit flies is a deeply flawed approach to reducing numbers of these pests, because large numbers of their offspring will die as maggots in the fruit. Not only does this fail to protect the crop, millions of GM fruit fly maggots, most dead, but some alive, will enter the food chain where they could pose risks to human health and the environment. Oxitec's experiments should not go ahead until rules for safety testing and plans for labeling and segregation of contaminated fruits have been thoroughly debated and assessed. If these issues are ignored, growers could suffer serious impacts on the market for their crops. It's also important to note that there is no specific regulatory process for GM insects anywhere in the world. Wallace went on to state that regulatory decisions on GM insects in Europe and around the world are being biased by corporate interests, as the UK biotech company Oxitec has infiltrated decision-making processes around the world. The company has close links to the multinational pesticide and seed company, Syngenta. Oxitec has already made large-scale open releases of GM mosquitoes in the Cayman Islands, Malaysia and Brazil, and is developing GM agricultural pests, jointly with Syngenta. The public will be shocked to learn that GM insects can be released into the environment without any proper oversight. Conflicts of interest should be removed from all decision-making processes to ensure the public have a proper say about these plans. Dr. Helen Wallace, director of GM Watch UK. As the world focuses on Zika's rapid advance in the Americas, experts warn the virus that originated in Africa is just one of a growing number of continent-jumping diseases carried by mosquitoes threatening swaths of humanity. The battle against the insects on the streets of Brazil is the latest in an ancient war between humankind and the Culichidae, or mosquito, family, which the pests frequently win. Today, mosquito invaders are turning up with increasing regularity from Washington, D.C. to Strasbourg, challenging the notion that the diseases they carry will remain confined to the tropics, scientists documenting the cases told Reuters. Ironically, humans have rolled out the red carpet for the invaders by transporting them around the world and providing a trash-strewn urban landscape that suits them to perfection. The Aedes aegypti species blamed for transmitting Zika breeds in car tires, tin cans, dog bowls and cemetery flower vases. And its females are great at spreading disease, as they take multiple bites to satisfy their hunger for the protein and human blood they need to develop their eggs. Around the world, disease-carrying mosquitoes are advancing at speed, taking viruses such as dengue and Zika, plus a host of lesser-known ills such as chikungunya and St. Louis encephalitis, into new territories from Europe to the Pacific. The concern is that we have these species spreading everywhere. Today the focus is on Zika, but they can carry many different viruses and pathogens, said Annabella Fayou, head of the department that tracks mosquito viruses at France's Institut Pasteur. In 2014, there was a large outbreak of chikungunya, which causes fever and joint pains, in the Caribbean, where it had not been seen before, while the same virus sickened Italians in 2007. Is a wake-up call for public health officials. Europe has seen the re-emergence of malaria in Greece for the first time in decades, and the appearance of West Nile fever in eastern parts of the continent. Out on the Atlantic, the Madeira archipelago reported more than 2,000 cases of dengue in 2012, in a sign of the northerly advance of what, at least until Zika, has been the world's fastest-spreading tropical disease. In the past 40 years, 6 new invasive mosquito species have become established in Europe, with 5 arriving since 1990, driven in large part by the international trade in used vehicle tires. Mosquitoes lay their eggs in the tires and they hatch when rain moistens them at their destination. North American health experts are also racing to keep up, with the first appearance of Aedes japonicus, an invasive mosquito, in western Canada last November, and Aedes aegypti found in Washington, D.C., apparently after spending the winter in sewers or metro subway stations. spread unprecedented. The speed of change in mosquito-borne diseases since the late 1990s has been unprecedented, according to Julian Medlock, a medical entomologist at Public Health England, a government agency. For many experts, the biggest potential threat is Aedes albopictus, otherwise known as the Asian tiger mosquito, which is expanding its range widely and is capable of spreading more than 25 viruses, including Zika. There is strong evidence that Aedes albopictus is now outcompeting Aegypti in some areas and becoming more dominant, said Ralph Harbach, an entomologist at London's Natural History Museum, who has been studying mosquitoes since 1976. In the United States, Aedes albopictus has been found as far north as Massachusetts and as far west as California. In Europe it has reached Paris and Strasbourg. Adding to the challenge for public health authorities are the blurred lines between diseases carried by different mosquitoes, as shown by research in Brazil this month that another common mosquito, Culex quinkfastidius, may also be able to carry Zika.